Welcome to Siege, a podcast about Castles and Crusades and other Siege engine games, and whatever the hell else we want to talk about. Tonight, you're joined with me, George, and
me, Sam.
There we go.
And,
what a great intro.
And don't forget the friendly skeletons and zombies that are around us right now.
They're coming to take us away.
They are. Ha ha, hee hee, ho ho.
So on tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about Turning Undead.
Turning Undead, what's that?
That's what clerics like to do. And sometimes paladins.
The paladins have to be higher level. They have to be better than to even get the opportunity.
You know what? I like that. They have to be better because they are better.
Yeah, well, not until they're third level.
They got a lot going on at the lower levels.
That's true. They do. So what does Turning Undead let you do? What is it? What happens?
At lower levels, you just simply turn them. You make them flee. If you're a good cleric.
What happens if you're evil?
Well, if you're evil, then you get to command them. And you know what else you can do as an evil cleric?
You can turn a paladin.
Turn a paladin. Yeah.
Turn that paladin that thought he was better than everybody else. Yep. Just got turned.
Yeah. And you know, when I looked at this, I was like, well, they're immune to fear. And I'm like, Turn Undead has nothing to do with fear.
Yep. It's not a fear-based attack. That's right.
I was looking for a loophole.
Yeah, sorry. No loophole for the paladin. No loophole for the paladin. In all seriousness, though, the thing I'm saying about third level, it's true, folks. The paladin can turn undead, but not until they reach third level. And then when they are third level, they can only turn undead with the same efficacy as if they were a first level cleric. So that offset continues for the entire life of the paladin, as whenever they want to turn undead, they can do so, provided they're at least level 3, but they turn as if they were a cleric 2 levels below their actual paladin level.
And this is important, depending on your campaign, on what you're running. You may want to make your paladin prime in wisdom to give them that extra little bonus to turning undead. Because
when you do a Turning Undead action, first of all, it's considered a ranged attack. It's a special ranged attack. So that means technically that you could move half a move and then turn undead, because you can move half your movement and still attack. And because Turn Undead is a ranged attack, you can actually move half your movement before you do it. So you can run out and brandish your whatever and yell and hopefully get rid of all those undead that are swarming the fighter that's in front of you.
Yeah. Or just blast them back.
Yep, blast them back. Like that. So when you make a Turn Undead check, you're rolling a Wisdom Siege check. So you're rolling a D20. You're adding your level if you're a cleric. And if you're a paladin, you're adding your level -2, right? And then you're adding your wisdom bonus. And just like anything else, your challenge class is going to be the hit dice of the creatures you're trying to turn, plus the challenge base. So if you're wisdom prime, that means your challenge base is 12. So your challenge class is 12 plus the hit dice. And if you're not wisdom prime, so if you're that paladin that chose not wisdom, maybe strength and charisma, right?
Yeah.
Then you're not wisdom prime. Your starting challenge base is 18. And so your number to meet or beat is 18 plus the hit dice of the creature.
And you're going to have to call out what type of undead you're going to turn. So, for example, you need to declare skeletons and not zombies.
If you're in a room and there's more than one type, in other words, is what you're saying, right? So if there's like skeletons and zombies, you can't turn them all at the same time.
Right. You need to be very clear on who you're going to turn. You have to be like, zombies only this time. Is that how you do it?
Yeah, that's what you say when you run out. Zombies only. when the next time I'm a cleric, I'm totally going to do that. Zombies only, and put out my holy symbol.
Because you want to get their attention.
That's right. You want to get their attention. Otherwise, but in all seriousness, you can only turn one type of undead at a time. So if there are zombies and skeletons and, say, a mummy, right? I don't know why you would be in a room with all three of those, coming at you at the same time. But let's say you made a poor choice and a poor decision earlier, and that put you in that chamber with all three of those types. When you if you want to turn all three of those creatures, you have to turn undead 3 times. Once for the zombies, and then on a different turn, once for the skeletons, and then on a different turn, once for the mummy.
It does have a nice benefit, because if that mummy is coming towards you right away, you definitely want to try to turn that first, unless the skeletons are going to mow you down first.
Well, I mean, it really, it depends on, where they are. And so,
situational.
The thing is, it's your choice, right? So just to be clear, it's your choice. It's not that you turn the type closest to you. It is actually your choice.
And it's anything within that range of 60 feet.
Mm-hmm. It's anything, but not necessarily all of them, right? So
correct.
If you're, so there's actually 3 classes of undead, right? There's 3 types.
Yes.
There's 3 types that we're going to talk about. And I don't mean zombies, skeletons, and mummies. Those are 3 different types, but that's not what I mean. So we have a question first, right? The question is, okay, it says you have to brandish your holy symbol. You have to hold it and thrust it toward the undead that you're trying to turn. And you have to utter a prayer or a chant or yell out something, zombies only, right? But can that zombie hear? Or if you said, skeletons be gone, is the skeleton seeing you or hearing you?
No. Maybe.
I don't know. So the thing is that some people have asked or pondered why, if a skeleton, for example, skeleton has no eyes, right? It's just bones, and it has no working ears, because the working part of your ear is the soft tissue, not just the hole in your skull. So if that stuff is all gone and you're just bones, you can't hear. You can't hear the person say, skeletons be gone, and you can't hear, and you can't see the shining holy symbol. So why do you have to do those if it's not about the skeleton?
I think you're doing it for yourself and your God, your deity.
Yeah. That's what I would say too.
To call down that power.
Yeah. Yeah. As a person who's played clerics a lot in the past, I would say that would be my rationale and explanation too, is that it's more about you getting the attention of your deity for that split second, or calling on a little tiny snippet of power from that deity and making it forcefully enter the holy symbol so that it can then emanate out and affect the undead and scare them away, basically. Now, it's not a fear effect, so I'm using the word scare sort of loosely, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So technically they don't have to see, right? And they don't have to hear, but the cleric still has to do those things, even if the thing can't see or hear.
Right. Which, brings into, if you're paralyzed, right? If you're held,
right.
You have to be able to do these things.
Right. Or if you've been incapacitated, if you were about to turn undead, but something shot an arrow into you and took your hit points down to 0, what would happen then?
You can't do it until you're healed above 0 hit points.
Yeah.
So that there are some limiters.
Don't let the cleric go down, folks. That's the problem, is you have to protect the cleric. I know you got to protect the wizard too, but you got to protect the cleric.
So I need to write this down. 1, don't charge the troll.
Yeah, don't charge the troll. 2, yell out, zombies only. 3, don't let the cleric go to 0 hit points. So the key here is, or maybe I should say the question is, if you attempt to turn, let me put it this way. The rule says you can only attempt to turn a group once every 24 hours. So let's go back to our scenario. You have zombies on one side, 6 zombies and 10 skeletons and a mummy. Okay. 6 zombies, 10 skeletons and a mummy. You have to turn each of those individually, right?
Correct.
Each group individually. So if you try to turn the zombies and you succeed, okay, so you succeeded, they are going to run away. Well, actually, that's not true. They're going to flee, although they don't necessarily run. So that's kind of something we might talk about in a minute. But they're going to go away from the cleric, right? They're going to go away, or the paladin. Whoever did the turning, they will try to move away from that individual, okay? If you fail, they're not going to move away from you, but you can't try again. You can, if you fail the zombies, you can try the skeletons and you can try the mummy. But if you fail the zombies, you can't try the zombies again. Now, if another group of, let's say if four rounds go by and you think the combat's almost over and you've almost killed or turned everyone, and another group of zombies shows up, a different group, and you fail to turn the first group, you get to try again with the second group. But if you turn that group, it doesn't turn any of the other zombies that you failed the first time. Because once they have succeeded in avoiding your turn attempt, they cannot be turned from you, from that particular cleric, for 24 hours. But if a new group of that same kind comes in, they don't get that same benefit. You can still attempt to turn them, which all that makes it sound way more complicated than it is. Here's the real deal. You can attempt, if you don't think about it as groups, just think about it as individuals. You can attempt to turn any individual undead creature, whether it's part of a group or not. You get one chance every 24 hours. If you fail, you have to wait 24 hours before you can attempt with that individual again. That's how it works.
So what if I succeed?
If you succeed, then you have to figure out how many of that group that you turned, maybe. Because here's the thing. First of all, it's a wisdom siege check to see if you succeed at the turning, but to figure out how many you turn, it depends on the type of, it's not a wisdom check anymore. It now depends on the type of undead it is and what your charisma modifier is. So there are 3 types of undead. Okay. There are common undead, which are non-sentient automatons, like the skeletons and zombies, right? They're kind of, they are animated by usually a necromancer of some sort or some sort of evil, priest or something. And they are not under their own volition. They don't have brains. They don't have any intelligence. They're just sort of the shuffling undead is what I often call them, right? They're just kind of non-sentient. They have like one job and that's all they can do. Then there are the extraordinary undead. That's your second category. Those are kind of sort of half sentient, right? They have a lot of power. They're typically trapped, right? So you're talking about ghosts and wraiths and maybe specters, right? And they're ones that have, they're trapped and they're probably angry, or maybe they've gone mad, and they're very, very dangerous. But they would be what we call extraordinary undead. And then there's the third category that are called unique undead. And those are very rare and powerful. They have a very strong personality, that is a very strong will, right? And they have intelligence. So the first 2 don't necessarily have intelligence. Common undead don't have any intelligence. They are definitely non-sentient. But the extraordinary group, the group in the middle, they might have a little bit of intelligence, but usually that intelligence is sort of it's been affected by the fact that they're trapped between the material world and the ethereal world or the spirit world, right? And so they're kind of driven by other motivations that affects how intelligently they can make a decision. Whereas the unique undead, they're actually intelligent. Those are your things like liches, right? Those liches are really super intelligent. Vampires, very, very intelligent. So the thing is that when you turn, it depends on what kind they are, how many of them you can turn. So those common ones that are like skeletons and zombies, if you succeed on your wisdom check to turn, you're going to roll a D12 and add your charisma modifier, even if it's negative. Okay. And that's how many you turned. So it's possible you only turn one of those. And it's also possible you turn 12, plus or minus whatever your charisma modifier is. For the extraordinary group, you're talking about 1d6 of those. So you can only turn 1d6 because it takes a lot more power to turn those because they're just more powerful in general. And then for the unique undead, you can only turn one of those, right? Here's the thing though. You add your charisma when you turn. So even though you can only turn one unique undead, if you have a +1 charisma modifier, are you turning 2?
Yeah.
Well, that depends on the CK's interpretation of the rules. What do you think, George? Would you let them turn 2? If you had 2 vampires.
If you're fighting two vampires, you're really in a jam. And
that's true. you done messed up.
I think I would only let them turn. Well, I would let them turn both of them. Okay. However, if they have a minus charisma, a charisma modifier that's a negative.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Then
can you even turn a vampire, even if it's only 1?
Right.
Because if your charisma modifier is -1, well, 1 minus 1 is 0, folks. I don't know what to tell you.
And you may not be that good of a cleric. I mean, paladins would have no problem, of course.
Right.
Not that anyone is biased for paladins, but
no, I don't think anybody on this podcast is biased for paladins. No.
But it does. It's something for a CK to really think about on how they want to run their game.
Yeah, in all seriousness, we're kind of joking and whatnot, but we're not really. Like, this really is a question that you should think about if you have a cleric and or a paladin in your game and you're going to put them up against a unique undead, right? Because if you do, and it turns out that your cleric has a -1 charisma modifier, which in the general sense it might have never really ever affected them before. It's just a kind of a shrug and, charisma is a dumb stat for a lot of people and whatever.
Yeah.
But if it really means, right, that one unique undead cannot be turned, right? Because there's no, in a lot of games, it'll say, oh, you could do this, a minimum 1, right? Like even if you had a negative modifier, you'd still have a minimum of a 1 effect, right? This doesn't say that.
No.
That means it's up to the CK. It's up to the CK whether you allow your cleric who has a -1 charisma modifier to turn that vampire.
Yeah.
Or maybe maybe that becomes a game quest, right? Maybe they realize, oh, we're hunting this thing, and then they figure out, oh, this villain might be a vampire. And then the cleric goes, oh, crud, I can't turn a vampire. Literally, I have no chance of turning a vampire. Now they go on a quest to find, a tome of personality that will, some kind of magic item that will award a charisma point to make it so that cleric no longer has a -1 charisma modifier.
Or someone needs to cast enhance ability or enhance attribute.
Yeah. Then that's up to the CK again, though, right? Like, yeah, I mean, it's a wizard spell. So that's how you get your wizard and your paladin or cleric to work together to try to increase that. And if you want to, let's say you're being hounded by 20 skeletons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to turn undead, but it's a paladin. So he's already working as if he's 2 levels lower, right? And they're common undead, but there's, 20 of them, and you can only roll a 12 on a D12. So maybe you have your wizard cast enhance attribute to increase that paladin's charisma even more so that he gets a high enough bonus that you could wipe out almost or make flee almost all of the zombies or skeletons or whatever it was. Right?
Exactly.
That's a
way to do it.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And it shows teamwork and, a little bit of planning on the party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I would reward that with a nice narrative and possibly mechanical bonus of some sort. Right.
Yeah.
So what happens when creatures are actually turned? What are because I said earlier, oh, they move away, but we didn't really go into the details. So what happens when a turning is successful?
So once they're turned, they're going to flee for 10 rounds. And
what's fleeing? Is that running away?
To me, it's running away. However, it's written as they flee at their full movement rate. And that comes down to what is their full movement rate? Is it, a run? Is it hasty disengagement and moving away quickly or rapidly? So there is ambiguity on the fleeing option or the term.
Right. Well, I mean, like if you think about it, a zombie only has a movement rate of 20. So if you turn a bunch of zombies, they're, quote, fleeing, but they really only move 20 feet. Like that feels so anticlimactic, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're running. I mean, not that zombies can run. They are I do call them the shuffling undead, but if they are trying to flee from a source of divine energy that could destroy them, maybe they would go faster than 20 feet.
Agreed.
Rules is written, right? It says, well, for 10 rounds, they go to their full movement rate away from the turn, whoever turned them, right? Whether it's paladin or cleric. So the CK could decide, well, they could jog or they could run. So they could go either 2 times or 4 times their movement rate, right?
Correct. And that is up to the CK to determine, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that's an option. It's not presented as such, right? So again, on this podcast, we do a lot of rules as written because we're trying to tell you how the game is written. We try to point out when there are places where interpretation is important for the CK, when there's a sort of vagueness or something that is written in a way that leaves it purposefully up to interpretation, which we're going to see in a little while. But fleeing as a word, George and I, just in full disclosure, George and I were talking about this earlier, and to both him and I, the word flee makes it seem, if you look up in the dictionary what the word flee means, every entry that I could find in every different dictionary had running in it, right? Running from a something dangerous or running away from, a situation. Like fleeing had to do with getting away as fast as possible. And that's not the sense that they mean fleeing in this case, apparently, because they're saying fleeing at just you're just going your full movement rate. Well, your full movement rate is a walk. So they're not really fleeing. I mean, we're totally being pedantic, right? But like this is completely, but to us in terms of the narrative and like, I want to, like, for me, it's really a lot cooler if I'm the cleric and I brandish my holy symbol and I say, skeletons be gone, and the power of my deity is flowing through me. And it's emanating out from the holy symbol and it's causing the skeletons to run away. And they walk 10 feet. Like, that's not, you know what I mean? That's not awesome. That's kind of like, oh, okay, they're a little bit walking away. Like, so I, as a CK, would say, oh, they're running. They turn and they run.
So the interesting part behind it, to your point, if they run away, I like that the fact is that the party has to they're going to come back in 10 rounds. Okay. So it's not very long.
Right. Right.
They're going to have to chase them down in the dungeon or simply let them go and be ready, with a trap in a few moments.
Right.
If they don't flee their full movement rate, as in running, if they just move, like the zombies move 20 feet, it does allow the party to catch up to them relatively quickly. Even skeletons moving 30 feet. Your fighters may want to be charging because, these creatures will keep moving away unless the cleric gets involved or the paladin, depending on who turned them.
Right. So if whoever turned them gets too close, it cancels the turn, right?
Correct.
Isn't it something like 10 feet or something, right? So if the cleric or the paladin, whichever one turned the creatures, if they get within 10 feet of the creatures, the turning ends. It's almost like they step out of the shadows or something and the skeletons or zombies realize, oh, that's just a human, right? Or, oh, that's just a halfling or whatever. I don't need to be scared of them anymore. Now they're going to turn and they're going to attack again, right?
Right.
So the cleric or paladin cannot move closer, right? Can't really move close to the creatures. Everybody else can attack them though, right? Like there's no rule against it's not like attacking them reverses. It doesn't make them like snap out of it, so to speak. They're still just going to try to flee the cleric. Right?
Yeah. And what if it's an evil cleric? Are they going to make that paladin run or walk his full movement?
Right. Yeah. So see, that's another case where fleeing being just walking isn't really impactful, right?
Right.
Because what happens when you are actually afraid because of a fear effect? For example, let's just look at the fear spell, which is a 4th level spell. Panic and terror race through the hearts of the creatures affected by this spell, causing them to flee from the casters as fast as possible. If they're cornered, they cower in abject horror, which is actually very similar to turning, because if you corner a turned creature, if they cannot flee, they will cower right in the corner, right? So this is very similar to that. This says the creatures cower in abject horror if cornered, and if forced to confront the caster of the fear spell, any affected creature gets a -2 penalty to all rolls. That's not how Turn Undead works, right? Turn Undead, if the caster gets too close, it snaps them out of it. But if the caster is not close and they're still turned and they get cornered, they will cower, right?
Correct.
I think it says cower. It uses that same kind of language of cowering, right?
Mm-hmm.
What it doesn't use is the same quote as fast as possible, because then it limits it to walking. So when you're afraid, you run as fast as you can. When you're turned, you just kind of turn and saunter off. That's more like you lose interest. Right?
Right.
That's not like you're fleeing from a divine power. You would be running as fast. I mean, in my mind, right? You'd be running as fast as possible. Same as if you have fear cast upon you. So this is one of those cases where the rules as written, I would just change it to say fleeing equals running. Period.
Right. And
so anywhere in the book where it says flee, it means running.
And I think it's important to, when you talk to your players about this, that the paladin may be running away as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
yeah, if the paladin is turned by an evil cleric, it's basically the same as if your good cleric or whatever had turned some kind of evil undead creatures. It's the same exact process.
So we talked about turning, we talked about succeeding, we talked about failure. Here's a question, though. In one of the examples, we have 10 skeletons. I roll a d12. I get a 6. 6 skeletons are turned. They move away for 10 rounds, fleeing.
Right.
What about the other 4? Can I turn them again? I succeeded in turning the skeletons. I didn't fail.
Right.
It's a gray area, I believe. I know how I would rule for that.
I do too. I already know how I would rule, but let's take a look at the wording exactly. It says you can attempt to turn one type of undead per round. If it fails, you cannot attempt to turn that group again. Yeah. So, and there's no rule that says, but if it succeeded, but only affected part of them. So there are possibly 2 ways to go with this. Either you can attempt it again because you didn't fail. You just didn't provoke enough power from your deity to affect all of them. So you can attempt that again.
You got it, brother. You got it.
Or it's up for interpretation. So you could say, or you gave it your best shot, and those 4 or whatever that didn't get turned to the first time, they don't care about what you say or what power is out there. They are so strongly directed by whatever animated them that they don't turn. So you cannot attempt that again against those. Like, those are 2 very valid answers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, myself, I would choose choice A, right? You just attempt it again.
Yeah, I would go with choice A as well.
Right.
This came from many years of work and testing applications, and I would say it passes if it doesn't fail. So in this situation, you can turn them because you didn't fail. But it is interesting. And, you know, as a CK, this is something you need to consider before, you know, getting into Turn Undead and explaining this to the cleric or paladin. Yeah.
And so this whole time, you know, we've been talking about the fleeing aspect, and we mentioned the cowering, right?
Yes.
If they can't flee and they have to cower, everybody who attacks them gets a +2 bonus to hit automatically because they're cowering. Okay, it's a combat situational modifier. Here's the thing, though. Just like I said, the cleric can't get close to them. They also can't attack them, so you can't use a ranged attack either. So the cleric or paladin, in this case, whichever one turned them, cannot get within 10 feet of the turned undead and cannot attack them in any way. So that's that. So, you know, if you know, just to be clear, just because I was talking about, well, you can't get closer, and someone might say, well, then I'll just have my cleric, you know, throw some darts or you know, take out a bow or something and try to shoot, you know, but you can't do that either. Because if the cleric or paladin that turned the creatures attacks them, it breaks the turn and they will stop cowering and they'll fight back.
I think that's a fair point, that, you know, if they break it, they attack. And I think as a CK, you can determine who you want to attack with those creatures. Maybe it's going back to the creature that, or the character that caused this in the first place. Hatred for all that life and power.
So it should also be noted that not only can a cleric turn undead, they can also actually destroy them. But they have to be 5 levels higher than the hit dice of the creature they're trying to turn.
And they don't get to evil clerics do not get to destroy paladins if they're 5 levels higher. I just want to throw that out there.
But what happens to them? They don't destroy them, but what do?
They simply just turn them.
Well,
there's no real rule.
So not talking about a paladin, but if an evil cleric turns undead, the undead don't actually turn and they don't get destroyed. What happens is if they're 5 levels higher, they actually can control a number of undead. So let's say there's a 5th level cleric, evil cleric, and they have a bunch of, or 6th level evil cleric, and they have a bunch of 1 hit die creatures, right? 1 hit die skeletons. If they have a successful turning attack, they can actually control however number of them that they would have turned actually are now under that evil cleric's control. And if they're 10 levels or higher, then they automatically control the maximum possible number of undead that they would have turned. You don't even have to roll. They would just automatically control them.
Right.
And those controlled undead, it's not like for an hour or 10 turns. They become permanent servants of that evil cleric.
And they cannot have any more undead whose total hit dice is not 5 times more than the cleric. So 6th level cleric, he can only have 30 hit die of undead.
Right. So the paladin doesn't fall under that. As the paladin does, that doesn't happen. If an evil cleric turns a paladin, the paladin just flees. Right. The paladin is never in danger of being controlled by the evil cleric. Is that your reading of the rule?
That's my reading. It's the controlled undead become permanent servants.
Right.
And there's no real rule other than the paladin being
right. So here's the thing. That means he could control the paladin then. Rules as written, he could control. I think that's a CK call that has to be made.
Oh, it could be.
It says they can turn paladin as if they were unique undead. That means he could only, like if you had a party full of paladins, right? Or you gathered a bunch of paladins together, a paladin troop, and you went in, that cleric could only turn one at a time, right? Because that they would all, each of them would count as a unique undead, right? Or a unique paladin in this case. But if they succeed and they're more than X number of levels higher than the paladin, right? Then they just control them. If they're 5 levels high, if it's a 10th level evil cleric and a 5th level paladin, and that 10th level evil cleric successfully turns the paladin, they could control them.
I'm getting out my black Sharpie, Sam, and
you're going to cross out that part of the book. Suddenly, the paladin's not so favored by one of our hosts tonight, folks.
What is bias again?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it doesn't I and maybe I skipped it or missed it or something, but it definitely says
they're considered undead.
Yeah. So here's a question. Is it let's check the paladin entry. How about that?
Okay.
Because it might say that you can be turned but not controlled. It might say that, and I don't know. So I'm going to go check.
Or NPCs need to have a -1 to their charisma modifier.
All evil clerics have a -1 charisma.
Yeah.
That would not work.
Like a charisma of 8 or less.
No. I do not see anything in the paladin entry.
And on page 228, under the Turn Undead, there's a section for paladins that says paladins turn as a cleric 2 levels lower. That means the paladin can't turn undead until he's 3rd level, at which point the paladin may turn undead as a 1st level cleric. And the very last sentence is paladins themselves can be turned by evil clerics. Because with the meticulous editing, this would say turned or destroyed or compelled or combined or commanded by evil clerics. I am totally a player this moment.
So, and here's the thing though. So now let me point you back to page 227, just a couple of paragraphs ahead of that, under evil clerics, where it says evil clerics can assume control of undead instead of turning or destroying them, and can also turn paladins as if the paladins were unique undead. So that means that you treat the paladin, as from the CK's perspective, you treat the paladin like a unique undead, and that means that if the evil cleric is 5 or more hit dice higher than the level of the paladin, then they can still control them, because that's what would happen for a unique undead. If you had a 15th level evil cleric that came up against a vampire, that evil cleric could attempt a turn on that vampire, and then instead of turning the vampire, they could then control the vampire, which basically is turning the tables on that vampire, because vampires normally like dominate and control, right? So taking a gander at the vampire stat block here, it's a 8 hit die creature. So if we had a 15th level evil cleric trying to turn but control a vampire, that would mean they would have to roll a wisdom check with plus 15, because the evil cleric would add their hit dice of themselves or their level, which is 15, we said, plus their wisdom modifier. Let's just say it's a plus 3, so that they're going to roll a d20 plus 18, and they have to meet or beat a challenge level of 8. I think they could do it. And if they did it, they would actually be able to dominate that or control that vampire. And since they could do that, I think they could do it to a paladin.
I'm still going through and I'm creating magic items. I'm creating...
Lamenting the loss of all of your future paladins.
One of the parts behind this is that the Monsters and Treasure book does have the undead type. So that gives you a little bit more information about undead, as well as behind the majority of entries, it will say like undead, and then in brackets or parentheses, it'll state whether it's common, unique, or extraordinary.
Right. For example, the vampire that I'm looking at right now, which is on page 295 of the Monsters and Treasure 5th printing, it says type undead and in parentheses unique. So if that evil cleric it goes into a tomb and it turns out there's 2 vampires there, they might get screwed. Except if they have a charisma bonus, see, that's where we come back to, does their charisma bonus add and make him able to turn 2 uniques? I don't know. It's right. So that's why we're bringing this up, because all of those 2 or 3 things that we said were up to the CK and up to the interpretation of the CK and the players at the table, like that, those decisions could change how this would play out in various different situations.
Right. So yeah, if they're 5 levels higher and you're a good cleric or, of course, a good paladin, you get to destroy them.
Right.
And I think that's a very special moment. I would give that to the player to describe how they're destroyed, right?
Right. Yep.
What if you're 10 levels higher?
If you're 10 levels higher, you automatically destroy the maximum possible number.
Yes.
The thing is, and then also, again, they get to decide how it's destroyed, right? It could be they turn to ash, they could burst into flame, they could be consumed by light that starts from within and starts glowing out of the creases and crevices of their rotting skin, and then they eventually are just consumed by that light, and then the light winks out. Like, there's all kinds of ways to describe such an event, right? And you can let them make it as awesome as possible, right? Because why not? Because here's the thing, right? Clerics, yeah, they can cast spells, but turning undead, and it's kind of true of paladins, but paladins have other abilities too, right? But clerics, like, this is their thing, right? Healing and turning, those are the 2 things. And if you don't want your cleric to just be a heal bot, which is no fun for anybody, right? Then that means turning is like their class specialty. So let it be awesome.
And in being awesome, this cleric can turn undead all day. That's awesome. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. No limit to the number.
No.
It just, the only limit is if you try to turn that group and you failed, you can't try again for 24 hours. But if another group comes in, you try again. If another group comes in, you try again. If another group comes in, you try again, right? You could be going through a tomb, in other words, and if you fail to turn the first group of skeletons, it doesn't mean that you can never turn a skeleton for the whole rest of the day. It means just that group. They have shown that they are not going to succumb to your divine power, but you can attempt it with other skeletons.
However, there is a limit, isn't there?
What's the limit?
What if we turn to page 13 of the player's handbook under wisdom?
This attribute reflects depth of personal experience, the ability to make well-considered decisions or judgments, and represents a spiritual connection to a deity. The modifier affects the number of divine spells that can be cast each day, attempts to turn the undead, and all checks involving wisdom. So there's a limit.
There is a limit.
So now Sam gets to rant. Why the F? Why the F isn't that sentence also in either the turning undead part of the cleric class or the turning undead part in the back of the book?
I may give the short answer and say no.
This is reminiscent of the proficiency bonus, which is only on page 16 and never mentioned again, and is extremely important.
I do like your earlier point, and I think this is where most DMs fall. It is what this class does.
It's what the class does.
And I personally would not put a limit on it as a CK, DM, etc. You know, the chance of coming across undead in certain campaigns is very low. And, you know, it's an option, you know, that doesn't always get to be used.
Right. Well, let me put it this way. If you're running a game where you're specifically in like a crypt type area and you run across undead in almost every single game, right? Like every single session, then I could see where you might want to limit how it works or not. It's that I'm just saying I probably wouldn't still, but I could see where a CK could say, no, I want to use the limit. Okay. But if you're running a game where normally you don't run into undead and you finally are at this place, let's say you're finally 5th level or something, and they're now going into this crypt, and they know that there are some mummies in here and possibly, some kind of other high level, kind of dangerous undead, maybe a wight or something that, or maybe a specter, something that like does energy drain and whatnot. But you have to go 3 levels down into this huge crypt that's just filled with skeletons and zombies. I am not going to limit my cleric to only doing Turn Undead 3 times. I'm just not. It's just not. This is their chance to shine. Again, if you're doing that your whole campaign, then yeah, you might want to limit it. You might want to say, okay, well, you're going to have to find other ways to work through these kinds of challenging foes. Okay, fine. I get that. That's fair. But if this is like the one time you're ever in an undead area and chances are you're never going to be back, you're going to limit your cleric to casting it 3 times or to turning 3 times. I mean, I could see both ways.
What if
right? I could see both ways.
It also presents another issue. For example, what if the cleric has a wisdom of 12? How many turn attempts does that character get? 0?
Probably none.
None.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
And if you, again, I would just go with not concerned about the number of Turn Undead attempts you have.
Right.
I feel it's a little bit more heroic. But the part is that, this is not a skill that grows with level either at this point.
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is not a game where you have a lot of opportunities to increase attributes.
Correct.
So if you're having your party, if you're having your players roll attributes, 46 drop the lowest or 3d6 down the line or however you want to do it, right? A 13 to 15 wisdom, like you could have a 15 wisdom score and you're only going to get to turn undead once a day.
Exactly.
And 16 to 17 is only +2. You have to have an 18 or 19 to even get to 3.
Yeah. So if you would want to do this option, this rule, and you want to tweak it a little bit, maybe it's your wisdom bonus plus your level, just to give a little bit more back to the cleric.
Or, not to make everything really complicated, but you could have the cleric, you could do wisdom bonus plus level, and then have the cleric roll a d6 every morning when they're doing their prayers to see how much their deity smiles upon them. And then you add whatever their roll is. If you're going to bother to keep track of how many times they've turned anyway, it doesn't matter if you roll an extra d6, right? Right? I mean, I could just see it. You're at the end of a really long day and you've had, several fights through this crypt and you get to the end and there's like one really powerful undead. And the CK says to the player of the cleric, hey, I think you already turned undead twice today. You don't have any more divine power left to turn this creature. And everybody's down at like 5 hit points. And that's, okay, we're going to flee or we're going to TPK, right? And now let me be old school Sam. Or, you know what? You guys just didn't plan very well. Like the cleric knew he was only going to get to do it twice a day and he used his 2. So, that's it. You got to learn to use your resources better.
Or you look at the wizard and say, you need to cast that enhance attribute right now.
There you go. Right.
In hopes that I get another turn attempt.
Right.
There is 2 spells very similar in nature that will help with turning undead. Neither one of them is exactly practical. Consecrate, 2nd level cleric spell on 137, will give you a +3 bonus. As will Hallow, a 4th level cleric spell on 154, will also give you a bonus. As well, both of those, if cast by an evil cleric, will make a -3 to your turn undead attempts.
Right. So yeah, I was going to make that clear. Like the +3 is not +3 number of times you can turn. It's a +3 bonus to your wisdom check when you make the turn attempt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting.
So I think it really gives a CK a lot of different options on what they can do with turn undead. how they can modify it, tweak it, things like that. I feel that these spells help a little bit, and I think it could make for a really interesting game with just Turn Undead.
Mm-hmm. With just your one time per day of Turning Undead. Imagine the fun you'll have with your higher than average wisdom that lets you turn undead once per day.
Well,
I knew there was a wisdom cap, but I ignore that vehemently. I really do. Normally I'm kind of a rules as written guy, right? Like I'm like, okay, I appreciate that there are lots of places in the book for CKs to make decisions because of either vagaries in the rules or because of gaps that were either purposefully or accidentally left there. And it leaves us a lot of space to push the game in the direction we want. But there are a few things, very few things. It's a pretty short list, actually, because I'm not a huge, let me have a giant document of house rules, right? I want to keep my house rules to a minimum. But one of my house rules is I just completely ignore the wisdom turning limit because I think it's BS. Because I think it's supposed to be what that's the basis for me personally, because of the way I started gaming and when I started gaming and my unabashed love of clerics. Okay. Just to be perfectly honest, I'm obviously biased. I know this, but if that's the shtick, right? Not the heal bot, but the turning, that's the shtick. They should be able to do it as many times as they want. Why are we stopping them from doing the thing they do? But the thing is, that's also like a slippery slope argument, right? Because that could be used against me, right? Because then you could say, well, then how come we don't let barbarians do things more than once, or we don't let
exactly
whatever. So and so I try not to say things like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think as well, DMs could come up with some creative uses or situations with the turn undead attempts. I'm a DM. I like to, if I receive a really good prayer from a character when they do their turn undead, mm-hmm. or they describe something on how they're going to do it very well, either the role playing mm-hmm. aspect or the description, I will give a bonus at times. Don't always look for a bonus, but at times there might be a bonus to that turn undead attempt, or possibly even the number of undead affected by the turn.
Right. In fact, in the Castle Keeper's Guide on page 12, there is a table with some information about attributes. If you were to, the table is table 1.5. It's on page 12, and it's called Godlike Attributes, because basically what it does is it gives us the table of modifiers for attributes that go above 20. Because our modifiers in the PHB only go up 18 to 19, right? And we know that's a +3, as I pointed out earlier. But if you go to 20, the bonus becomes +4. At 22, it's +5. At 24, it's +6. At 30, it's +10. But here's what I wanted to point out. At 22, the bonus for wisdom, having a wisdom of 22. So if you used enhance ability and you got your wisdom up to 22, you would be able to turn double the number of undead creatures.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Not double the number of attempts, but double the number. So if you can normally, roll a D12 and turn 12 plus charisma modifier commons, now you could do 2D12, which is, that's pretty cool. I like it.
As well as, and this may depend on your campaign, but at, a mere 21st level cleric also has the option to banish extraplanar creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the campaign world you're working with, you can maybe substitute turn undead with turn, or banish demon.
Right.
It's your style of play, your campaign setting. And I know we're trying to go more with rules as written, but also the creative aspect mm-hmm. of modifying it for your game.
Yep. I agree. Well, do you have any final thoughts?
I think paladins are shafted by this rule.
Shafted by being able to be commanded, you mean?
Turned and turned.
So maybe we need to say, instead of protect the cleric, protect the paladin.
That's worse.
It's like the barbarian that failed his charisma check and ran away. Well, I mean, obviously my bias and George's. So I'm biased towards clerics, and George is biased towards paladins, obviously. And I think our biases are pretty obvious in this episode. But I do think, at least I hope, that we presented this in a way that sort of shows you the ins and outs of this particular ability, which is a sort of hallmark ability for the clerics, definitely, and for paladins. They have some other abilities too, but them being able to turn is actually, there aren't very many classes as written that when they hit a certain level, they get to do things that another class can do. And so this sort of shows kind of the tenuous relationship between clerics and paladins, and how that could actually be some good role-playing fodder, especially if the two that are in the party follow different deities, right? So anyway, that's kind of my final thoughts. If you have anything else, let me know.
I think this is up to CKs on being creative as well. A few years back, I'll have to look for the post. One player posted on the Castles and Crusades Facebook page about creating, you don't turn undead, you keep them at bay. And every round you have to roll to maintain that aura. And I thought that was unique.
Right.
You're not chasing down undead. I don't know if there's an option for destroying them, but you simply kept them at bay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the players could attack, aside from the cleric. Mm-hmm. So it creates an interesting situation, because I could just see the hordes of undead gathering up upon you. It's interesting. It's a different thought. Or simply just stunning undead rather than turning them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the discussion could go on to the Troller Games Discord to describe, again, how you as a CK want to run some of these rules and options that we mentioned, or maybe your own turn undead or your house rules. Let us hear them, as long as they don't have to deal with paladins being turned.
Let's hear your house rule about making it easier for paladins to be commanded by an evil cleric.
Any words of wisdom before we sign off?
I don't think so. Just, yeah, no, not really. I think it's, this is one of those things that is sort of, like real D&D evocative, right? Like, this is something that Turning Undead is something I remember from very early games that I played of D&D, of basic D&D in first edition. And like, it was just for some reason it made me love clerics, right? I just love the idea of, they can just have this huge power come through them, and it just forces the undead to go away. And, that is just it's just a cool thing. It just got stuck in my head as that's one of the really cool events and effects and abilities that could possibly be happening in the game. And, so have fun with it. Let it be interesting. Whatever you decide to do with the decisions that have to be made, with the sort of the rulings that you have to make as a CK, think about the thing that's the most fun.
True.
And do that.
I like that, Sam. My memorable moment in AD&D was when another player came in playing the cleric and wiped out the undead with a snap of his fingers. It was a cool moment that, none of us will forget,
Yeah. Very cool. You want to say where people can find you on the internet?
Well, they can find me on the Troll Lord Games Discord as UltraMagnus George.
And you can find me on the Troll Lord Games Discord as DMSamuel. You can also find me on Blue Sky and that X thing and Mastodon and whatever at DMSamuel. And you can also find me on the web at rpgmusings.com. And you can find the Siege podcast everywhere where great podcasts are sold or given away for free.